Hello everyone, it's Mimi here. BMS working in the NHS. And today's video will be about the fifth module of the Section 2 in the IBMS digital registration portfolio called Research and Development. So, just a quick introduction to this video. It will be short and sweet, I promise. It will be focused on the learning outcomes, different types of evidence, and HCPC SOPs that need to be met in this module. We will discuss evidence justification and IBMS evidence suggestions. I will share with you some of my evidence ideas, and we will finish with some helpful tips to make your portfolio really good. With all that said, I hope you will enjoy the content of my video and I hope you will learn a lot. So let's dive into the fifth module of the second section. These are the learning outcomes you should be able to meet when you have completed this module. You should be able to analyze qualitative and quantitative data and demonstrate a logical and systematic approach to problem solving. Critically evaluate research articles and other evidence to inform your own practice. Use current research in your discipline to generate hypotheses, design experiments, and analyze novel data to develop your knowledge and expertise. When you complete this module, come back to the learning outcomes to see and check that you have actually met them. This is the mandatory piece of evidence. The task is, prepare a written report on a workplace-based activity, or summary of final year university research project, that includes statistical analysis, data interpretation, and evaluation of the study design. So to break it down, first part is asking you to prepare a written report. So you need to write this piece of evidence in a written report style. Next part of the task is asking you to write about a workplace-based activity. So consider tasks you are doing in your practice. The task is also suggesting an alternative approach in which you can write a summary of your final year project done at the university. If you chose this option, write it in a style of a summary, not a written report. The next part of the task is asking you to include statistical analysis, data interpretation, and evaluations of the study design. Think about what statistical analysis you are using in your practice, or you used for your project. Then think about the ways you interpret data during your practice or during the project. Then think about the evaluation of the study design or methodology you are using in your practice. IBMS also offers their advice on how to approach this mandatory evidence, which I think is very good. The first part of the advice is telling you that the evidence should summarize a piece of research carried out in the laboratory. Alternatively, summarize your research project completed at university, if it is relevant to the biomedical science. Next part of the advice is asking you to include the approach to experimental design, troubleshooting, data collection, statistical analysis, and interpretation. What experimental design did you choose? Did you encounter any problems? If so, how did you overcome them? What type of data did you collect and analyze and interpret them? What statistical analysis did you use? Next part of the advice is asking you to demonstrate your understanding of how developing your research skills, study design, and evaluation of data positively impacted your laboratory, or your final project. How did your department benefited? Now let's talk about the 3 SOPs that need to be met by this piece of mandatory evidence. The first standard is, recognize the value of research to the critical evaluation of practice. To meet this standard, you need to recognize the value of research to critical evaluation of practice. Our practice is evidence-based practice, and when you think about it, research generates evidence. Consider improvement of diagnostic accuracy, improvement of methods, developing and updating guidelines based on new findings, identifying and filling gaps in knowledge, enhancing communication, driving innovation, improving patient management and outcome, quality assurance, and so on. Healthcare is constantly evolving, hence the need for CPD and up-to-date practice. The second standard is, use statistical packages and present data in an appropriate format. This one is straightforward. Demonstrate you can use statistical packages and present data in an appropriate format. What are statistical packages? What statistical analysis can you use? Consider descriptive, inferential, predictive, prescriptive, or exploratory. What statistical tests can you use? Consider student t-test, ANOVA, regression analysis, chi-square test, factor cluster analysis, and so on. What statistical tools are you aware of? Consider Python, the SPSS, and others. What data presentation formats can you use? Consider tabular, graphical, or reporting. The third standard is, design experiments, report, interpret and present data using scientific convention, including application of SI units and other units used in biomedical science. To meet this standard you need to design experiment, report, interpret and present data using scientific convention, including application SI units and other units used in biomedical science. How can you design experiments? Consider hypothesis, methodology, accuracy, replication, compliance, controls, and so on. How would you process generated data? Consider ways to interpret, present and report generated data. What skills are important for designing and conducting experiments? Consider proficiency, communication skills, adherence to standards, use of specialist equipment and statistical analysis. Those are the 3 standards you have to keep in mind when writing your mandatory evidence. They should all be demonstrated in your mandatory evidence. So now that we have finished with the mandatory evidence, let's have a look at the choice evidence 2 and 3, which are candidates' choice evidence and Q&A set by the trainer. They both together have to meet 7 HCPC standards. And if you download the module descriptors for the registration portfolio from the IBMS website, you will find some example evidence suggested by the IBMS, which is very handy. These are the 7 HCPC standards that have to be met by those 2 pieces of evidence. The first standard is: demonstrate a logical and systematic approach to problem solving. This one is straightforward. To meet it you need to demonstrate logical and systematic approach to problem solving. Solve problems? Do you think about what the problem is before you take actions? Do you try to understand what the problem is before you try to resolve it? Do you have the necessary understanding to problem solve? How do you approach a problem? Consider problem identification, root cause analysis, brainstorming, potential solutions, action planning, action implementation, execution, monitoring, verification, and evaluation of results. The second standard is, use research, reasoning and problem-solving skills when determining appropriate actions. This one links nicely to the previous one. To meet it you need to use research, reasoning, and problem-solving skills when determining appropriate actions. What research is available to you to problem solve? What are your reasons for solving the problem the way you did? What problem-solving skills do you have? Consider information gathering, critical thinking, reasoning, decision-making, analysis, communication, adaptability, and so on. The third standard is, demonstrate awareness of the principles and applications of scientific inquiry, including the evaluation of treatment efficacy and the research process. To meet this standard you need to be aware of principles and applications of scientific inquiry, including evaluation of treatment efficacy and the research process. What are principles and applications of scientific inquiry? Consider evidence-based practice, empirical evidence, peer review, systematic process, problem-solving, methodology, critical review, continuous improvement, data-driven decisions, and so on. How can you evaluate treatment efficacy? Consider trials, meta-analysis, systematic review, outcome measure, measurable changes in disease, extent of response, biomarker analysis, imaging, digital pathology, and so on. The fourth standard is, change their practice as needed to take account of new developments, technologies, and changing contexts. To meet this standard, you need to change your practice, if needed, to take account of new developments, technologies, and changing contexts. Consider proactive adaptation, content-dependent, long learning, upskilling, CPD, replacing outdated methods with new, introduction of automation, introduction of digitalization, paper versus electronic documentation, and so on. Why is it important that we implement new developments or technologies? What impact does this have on service users, patients, and their care? Consider fitness to practice, maintaining standards, ever-evolving, ever-improving patient care. The fifth standard is, recognize a range of research methodologies relevant to their role. Another straight one. To meet it, you need to recognize a range of research methodologies relevant to your role. What research methodologies are relevant to your role? Consider quantitative or qualitative research, generating new data, analyzing existing data, in vitro, in vivo, ex vivo, or in silico research, observation or experimental studies, epidemiology, laboratory techniques like cell culture, microscopy, PCR, data collection via interviews, surveys, or case studies, and so on. Are these relevant to your role? If so, how and why? The sixth standard is, critically evaluate research and other evidence to inform their own practice. Straight one again. Critically evaluate research and other evidence to inform your practice. What is critical evaluation? How do you know research is of a relevant value to your practice? Consider assessing validity, liability, relevance, applicability of information, analysis of findings and conclusions, understanding the context, overall value of research, objectivity, clarity, trustworthiness of evidence, justification, purpose of research, role of the author, identification of bias or conflict of interest, and so on. The seventh standard is, engage service users in research as appropriate. To meet this standard, you need to engage service users in research, if appropriate. How would you engage service users in research? Consider consultation, collaboration, co-production, co-design, sharing of results, accessible language, flexibility, methods of engagement, project stages, ethical and practical support, overcoming barriers, empowerment, increasing trust, and improved care. Always have those 7 standards in your mind when you are selecting a piece of evidence and then when you are writing it. Remember, all those standards need to be demonstrated in 2 pieces of evidence you choose. One more thing you have to include when choosing and writing your evidence. And that is the evidence justification. For the mandatory piece of evidence, the IBMS has provided a very good justification why they would want you to do that piece of evidence. I would strongly advise you to read their justifications, as this can form the basis for how to be justifying your choice of evidence. You should also include what standards you have met by your evidence. Think about what type of evidence you have chosen, then think why you have chosen that particular evidence, and think which standards you are meeting with that evidence as well. These are some suggestions from the IBMS that could be used as the choice evidence in this section. They are pretty good and can meet several standards, which is what you need. And these are types of evidence ideas I would also suggest. Again, they can meet several standards as well, which is the goal. I would also like to share with you some helpful tips that can make your portfolio look really good. Try to present the information in various formats such as tables, pictures, photographs, diagrams, flowcharts, graphs, or even videos, if you can. This nicely breaks down a lot of text that is usually present in specialist portfolios. Try to make it a little bit more interesting to the reader, which will be your training officer and eventually the verifier. Try to put yourself in their shoes. How would you like to read hundreds of pages of plain text? There is a saying I really like, and it goes like this: a picture is worth 1,000 words. I will make a video where I will share with you my evidence I used for my portfolio back in the day. Hopefully that will help as well. Also try to use various types of evidence, not just one type, like case studies, for each subsection. You could use experiments, case studies, annotated results, annotated photographs of you performing tasks, evidence of troubleshooting, annotated EQA results, nonconformances, validation and verification evidence, comparisons of different approaches and their pros and cons, control material production, certificates of course attendance with reflective statements, annotated images or charts, and so on. Try to bring in your personality. Think about the ways you like to learn best. If you like experimenting, perform experiment. If you like troubleshooting, perform troubleshooting. Choose something that demonstrates your understanding, knowledge, skills, and how you apply this in your practice. And one more thing, keep the competence requirements in mind when you selecting your evidence. Good evidence will tick off several requirements. And this brings me to the end of today's video. Hopefully you now have a better understanding about the standards that are within this section and how to meet those standards with relevant evidence. And my final take-home message? Keep those standards in mind when selecting and approaching your evidence. Bye for now.